reaching out across the USA.
If you were going to get in a time machine and go back and tell me that Wizkids was going to make a line of miniatures that would be more expensive than Games Workshop stuff, then I would not believe you. But here we are.
So that's $3.58 per orc. Even the prices for Warhammer models look okay in this comparison. Savage Orcs are $2.70 per model. The brand new and overpriced Gut Rippas are $5 per model. And then Frameworks is coming in at more than $7 per orc. These are decent models, but they're also priced about 2 times higher than they should be.
Goobertown Hobbies did a great video about the new Frameworks. He pointed out the positive aspects of the new plastic Sprue miniatures, and also the incredibly confusing price points, especially the price point on the kobolds. When I saw the $50 price point, I just assumed, oh, okay, they accidentally put that price point on that much plastic, and it was a mistake. It's not a mistake. They want $50 for 7 kobolds and some extra parts. If you're unfamiliar with Games Workshop stuff, it honestly was a thing for like many years. Like, a lot of people just didn't get into that hobby because it was too expensive and had a real stigma of being very, very expensive. And now Wizkids apparently is trying to do the same thing for the D&D crowd, which is, it's weird. And Goobertown Hobbies actually brought up a little while back another thing. He said, I don't understand why there's not a lot of channels that do painting for D&D miniatures. And that's very true. There really aren't that many channels out there that focus on painting for D&D miniatures. That's because the vast majority of people that paint D&D stuff, they're painting for their game. There's not really a subculture of pro painting like you find in other board game miniatures, especially stuff like Warhammer. Every single time you see somebody paint up miniatures for whatever project is out there, they're never a D&D mini painter. They're somebody who usually paints Warhammer miniatures, and they end up painting other miniatures, including D&D miniatures as well. But the vast majority of people in the hobby do not professionally paint stuff. They paint stuff for their game. And that's why I don't quite understand why Wizkids thinks they can start ramping up immediately to Games Workshop level and beyond with this particular group of people that's interested in D&D. It's kind of the wrong group of hobbyists to do this. And it's very puzzling, because let me tell you, when they first came out with that first line of Noel Zur's, the PVC unpainted miniatures, pre-primed, I thought that product was amazing. I think literally they actually put some thought into it. They considered what miniatures, at least I assume they put some thought into it. Maybe they didn't. But for whether it was planned or dumb luck, they came out with a bunch of miniatures that had never really been widely available to people. So those $5 beholders, when they first came out, $5 per beholder, those were sold out everywhere online. Everywhere online. I know there's some weird people that are saying, oh, they're not actually sold out. Every major distributor where people normally buy miniatures, they were sold out for a long time. I'm assuming they were a very good selling product. And again, the price point was super low on those. And you really got a lot of value for what you got. So it's so strange that the same company that came out with that is coming out with like a product seemingly for like a completely different group of people, similar to the Warhammer people that like want like complex sprues, but for some reason don't go with high-end resin stuff, which exists, the Gale Force 9, and they also don't go with 3D printing, which also exists and is getting better pretty much every day. So I have no idea what marketing research they did about this, but it really seems this is a product that's like aimed at like a potential group of people that could be generated from this. And really, it's not just the frameworks. This is the old Icing Death miniature. This is the old Hasbro one. It's very beat up. I got it used. I've used it a lot. But you look at a miniature like this, and you realize, like, yeah, like, as simple as the paint job is, this miniature, in my opinion, is far superior to the new miniatures. I just tossed that on my bed because I know, wow, that's not a great thing. That miniature is durable. It's a mix of materials that's not going to break, and I cannot say the same for the new Wizkids dragons, which are like up to $300 MSRP.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I misspeak and say $300? What I meant to say was $400 MSRP miniatures. $400 MSRP for one miniature, for one statue. That's some wild stuff.
Which is just, it's wild that the prices have gotten this high. The old Hasbro Colossal Red Dragon, that MSRP'd, if you translate it into today's money, it's just under $100 in 2022 money. And that had translucent materials. It had a more complex painting thing. You could say that you can't sell something like that today because all the prices have gone up. Prices of manufacturing, prices of materials, all those prices have gone up. And I would say that, sure, but there's other stuff out there where the prices haven't gone up. Like stuff you can actually see and buy. Like the McFarlane Raw 10 set of toys. Those are made out of indestructible material, similar to the old Hasbro plastic. Those are painted okay, but those are also priced very, very low. And then you look at something like the new Tiamat, premium miniature, the $300 one. I saw that in person. The sculpting was very good. The paint job was not very good. The material is not very good. And then you look around and you see products from other lines. You see products from like Monster Hunter and stuff like that. And it seems like even though those have complex paint jobs, they have translucent materials. Most of those are like action figures, so there's more like parts. Those products may have gone up in price like maybe 50%, 75%. So reasonable when you consider like what's changed. So the prices are higher, but you're not comparing something to like a superior product for $100 versus a product I would say is inferior in a lot of ways for $300. When the price is that high, like even someone like me, I would actually consider, well, maybe I should just get a 3D printer and make that investment rather than invest my money into like one miniature, which is a statue which doesn't have a great paint job. I don't know. And considering the quality of the paint job, I might just consider trying to get like an alternative model from somebody like Reaper Miniatures or something, and then just paint it up myself, and it would be superior. As baffling as some of the decisions being made, and listen, by baffling, I don't mean short-term thinking. In the short term, this is going to make a lot of money. This is going to generate a ton of money. But is this good long-term? I don't see how it can. Considering what I'm seeing personally with all the local tabletop shops and everything like that, it's not really the greatest time to crowd shelves with stuff that might never sell. You know, the whole Critical Role pre-painted line, it's a little bit weird. I don't know if there's actually enough. Again, I don't know the numbers, but at least there was a baseline of people who would be interested, who run a campaign in that setting, who might be interested in those miniatures. Like, there was a customer base there. For these, I don't know where the customer base is. Like, this channel here, basically, I talk about so many alternative miniatures that you can find in tabletop wargaming. Like, the customer base there already has so many alternatives. Like you saw in the Goobertown video, all of those alternatives, even the most expensive ones, are literally cheaper than what Wizkids is offering. So I just don't know. Are they somehow hoping that there's going to be a new customer base generated who are really into D&D and really into custom painting, and they are going to want to buy these products because they want to buy official D&D miniatures? So in that case, there's already a line of miniatures for that, the Gale Force 9 miniatures. So it seems weird that, like, they think that the plastic Sprue miniatures, but people will be willing to pay insane prices when they already have a line of miniatures that these miniatures that are in the Sprue, the vast majority of them are duplicates of miniatures that already exist at a more affordable level. I just don't even know what to think. If you think that, like, maybe I'm wrong, maybe there is, like, this subculture of, like, miniature painters who don't already use what's available and would really want this. But like Goobertown Hobby says, there's really not that much of a subculture of painters that paint D&D stuff. There's really not that many channels that focus on that. Because, again, painting stuff for D&D is a really, like, individual thing where you're painting for your game. And thus, having the miniatures be Sprue miniatures, plastic miniatures, when there's higher quality stuff already available, including official D&D stuff, I don't know. I got no clue. If you have a clue, let me know in the comments below. When I was making this video, something occurred to me, like, that, like, literally whenever I hear a YouTuber talking about Warhammer, it's always the same thing. And if you don't recognize this guy is a very big streamer who's a multi-millionaire now. And even this is what he says about Warhammer.
Now, I used to play Warhammer 40K, but the problem with playing Warhammer 40K is that you basically have to make a lot of money to play that game.
Yeah.
Like, you do. You have to make a lot of money to play the game. Show him? Okay, so yeah, look at that.
So yeah, then he goes on to show off his miniatures, which I believe are from, like, the 1990s. So, like, legitimately, like, this is someone who loved the game, knows everything. Before this, he was talking about Warhammer, so he knows everything about Warhammer. He loves the fluff, he loves the story, he loves everything. But always, when any YouTuber, Mike Burnfire and Zach Hazard from another YouTuber, they do, like, Fallout stuff, but when they start talking about Warhammer, it's the exact same thing. Angry Joe, it's the exact same thing. Anytime anyone talks about Warhammer, they immediately say, don't get into this game because it's too expensive. That's burned into their brains. Again, this is a guy who's a multi-millionaire now. And even him, like, he just immediately goes into the disclaimer of, you know, Warhammer's great, but guys, you have to be, like, really rich to get into Warhammer. This is a multi-millionaire who's saying this because this thing has been burned, absolutely burned into people's brains. And you know what? I'm the exact same way. When I got into like Warhammer Fantasy roleplay, like, and again, this was at the end of the second edition of Fantasy Roleplay for Warhammer, and I was really into it. The books back then, because it was at the end of the cycle of them coming out with that edition, you could get books for like $5 or whatnot, and you could get books for like $20 for like the main books. So I bought all that stuff. What I did not buy is a lot of Warhammer Fantasy miniatures. I wasn't, like, flat broke, but the perception is that this stuff was super overpriced. And everybody that I hear talking about Warhammer has the exact same story. So I can't help but think this is exactly what's going to happen to D&D. D&D is going to completely just put a roadblock into certain parts of the hobby, because I think a lot of like the streaming stuff, a lot of the interesting like, you know, role play stuff, WizKids is just putting up this financial roadblock, which is going to just completely stop the progression of stuff. And you can say, oh, well, you know, there's other alternatives for miniatures. Even WizKids puts out cheaper miniatures. That's the same thing that happened with Warhammer and Games Workshop. Even though there's always pretty much been alternative miniatures from back in the day. All of these YouTubers, when they talked about how expensive Warhammer was as a hobby, there were cheaper alternatives for them as well. They could have just easily found better deals on Warhammer stuff with inexpensive stuff. They could have found better deals with alternative products. But that's not what happened. The main product line, that was the most expensive one, set the tone for the hobby. And that, what Games Workshop did, really, I think, limited their market base. So they were still profitable, they still made money, and there was still a lot of people who were interested in paying these prices. But the numbers were never there. Warhammer in those games never really went mainstream. And I honestly think in the long term they could have done much better. And I honestly really hope that D&D is not headed towards the same path. Because just in the same way, you can try to make the argument that, like, oh, well, there's cheaper D&D products, so having these uber expensive products isn't going to, it's not going to slow down D&D's popularity. Well, that, we already saw this exact same scenario play out, and it did slow down the popularity of the intellectual property of Games Workshop. And now, another company is doing the same thing for the intellectual property of Wizards of the Coast. And it's just, again, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills here of why this is now the strategy. It really seems like instead of doing research of like, what are the miniatures that people really want and we'll sell them those, the research now seems to be, what is the maximum amount of money that we can get out of these people? And pull in the same crowd from the Warhammer thing. And it's just like, the same crowd is spending, that Warhammer crowd is spending all their money on Warhammer models and miniatures. They are not going to all of a sudden say, oh yeah, well, we want to spend more money on D&D stuff. Like that hobby is already spoken for. And it's they have a very tight grip on that group of people. And they have a very tight grip on that subsect of, like, you know, hobbyists. So this makes no sense for the hobby, and it makes no sense for D&D. Yet that's what's happening. And I really hope that further down the line, we don't have a bunch of people that are on whatever the next YouTube is going to be talking about. Oh, well, D&D is great, but boy, it's really expensive. You don't want to get into the hobby, because that's exactly what's going to because we are going to repeat history, and that's exactly what's going to happen. Crazy stuff.